The lake was the reason I bought the land. After 30 years of serving in the Army, 18 of those stationed abroad, I wanted peace. Not metaphorical peace, not some philosophical awakening. I wanted literal, dead quiet, mirror-flat water, and the kind of silence that presses into your chest and tells you you're finally home. So when I stumbled upon the listing for a modest piece of property in Pine Hollow, 10 acres of tree-lined earth wrapped around a still spring-fed lake, I didn't hesitate. My wife, Sarah Whitman, had passed 3 years prior. Cancer. And though we had no children, we always dreamed of retiring somewhere private, somewhere green and undisturbed. I guess in a way, buying this land felt like fulfilling a promise I never got to make in time. I retired, packed up my tools and memories, and moved into the small cabin that came with the property. It was weathered, half forgotten by the previous owner, but it had a working fireplace and a porch that faced the lake. That was enough. For the first few months, nothing disturbed me. The deer wandered freely at dusk. Birds made their morning calls as predictably as the coffee pot clicked on. I'd built a small dock and set up a canoe. I cut the overgrown brush by hand and restored the old path leading from the cabin to the water. Everything I did with respect for the land, for the quiet, for the dream. Then the letter came. A white envelope stamped in red ink at the corner Pine Hollow Homeowners Association. I almost threw it out thinking it was a mistake. I wasn't part of any HOA. In fact, when I bought the land, my real estate agent assured me multiple times that it was unincorporated land, not subject to HOA jurisdiction. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. It was a form letter, bland and bureaucratic in tone, welcoming me to the Pine Hollow Lakeside District and informing me of several updates to community policies, including newly instituted HOA dues of $1,200, annually effective immediately. It also mentioned a community recreational area plan that would include shared access to all natural water features. My lake, apparently. I read it twice, then again. My hands tightened around the paper. I didn't even know there was an HOA in the vicinity, let alone one bold enough to claim my land as part of their shared recreational vision. The contact at the bottom of the letter was listed as Karen Delaney, President, Pine Hollow, HOA. She left a number and an email. I called. No answer. Straight to voicemail. I wrote a terse but polite email attaching my deed, highlighting the clear property lines, and stating that my land was private, fully owned, with no encumbrances, no easements, and most importantly, no HOA affiliation. No response. I shrugged it off, thinking it was a clerical error or some overeager volunteer drunk on administrative power. I didn't want trouble. I wanted solitude. A week passed. Then on a Saturday morning, I heard laughter echoing from the water. I stepped onto my porch, squinting through the sunlit trees, and there on the edge of my lake were 4 strangers setting up folding chairs and a cooler. Kids splashed in the shallows while a man cast a fishing line off my dock. My dock. I walked down calmly, trying not to let the pounding in my chest rise too far. "Excuse me," I said, hands open in front of me. "Can I help you?" The woman turned. "Oh, you must be the new neighbor. Karen said this was open to the community now." I blinked. Karen Delaney. HOA president, she added, like I should be impressed. She told us the lake was now part of the shared green space for the Lakeside District. Beautiful spot, by the way. I tightened my jaw. "This lake is on private property," I said, pointing toward the tree line. "All of this, including that dock." "Well, that's not what Karen told us," the man said, standing up suddenly defensive. "She said the lake was common property, just wasn't properly listed before. Then Karen is mistaken. Or lying," I said flatly. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just handed them each a printed copy of my parcel deed, copies I'd made that morning after seeing the letter. I had a gut feeling. Military habit, maybe. They packed up, unhappily. One of the kids started to cry. I stood there until they left. The next day, I walked the edge of the lake and posted 4 professionally printed signs, each one mounted in concrete bases and reading, "Private property, no trespassing. Trespassers will be reported." The calm returned for about a week. Then came the drone. It buzzed over my property like a mechanical mosquito, dipping low, circling the dock, then swooping back toward the treetops. It came again the next day, and again. I tracked its flight path and discovered the launch point, the edge of Lot 36, Karen's property. She lived in one of those faux Tuscan two-story houses with a view of the main road and a perfectly symmetrical garden that looked like it had never been stepped on by actual humans. I walked over respectfully, of course. I rang the doorbell and waited. Karen Delaney answered the door with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "I assume you've been enjoying your new place," she asked, folding her arms. "I'm here about the drone," I said, "and the people who came onto my lake." She sighed like I was some difficult child. "Mr. Jack Whitman." "Mr. Whitman." "I understand you may not be aware, but the HOA recently expanded its oversight to include all adjacent parcels that benefit from Pine Hollow infrastructure. I have my own well and septic system. I maintain my own road. I'm not connected to any HOA services. While the new map we filed with the county, I raised a hand. I checked the plat records this morning. Nothing's changed. My property is not under your jurisdiction." She blinked, but held her ground. "Our legal team interprets it differently." That set something off in me. I nodded slowly. "Then I guess we'll let the county judge interpret it next." I turned and walked away, her smile now gone. As I crossed back toward my property, I noticed something new: 3 real estate signs stuck just outside the tree line. They weren't on my land. Not quite, but the words chilled me. Pine Hollow. Lakeside access lots. Now available includes lake access, contact HOA president for details. My fists clenched at my sides. They weren't just claiming the lake. They were trying to sell it, or at least the illusion of access. They were using my land to raise their property values. And I knew right then, standing at the edge of that tree line, with the last light of day spilling gold across my lake, that this wasn't going to stop. Not on its own. Not politely. Not unless I made it stop. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch, a thermos of black coffee resting between my palms, the lake dim under the moonlight. The air was too quiet, like the world had paused to watch what I would do next. I'd been through battles overseas, faced insurgents and bureaucrats, but nothing ever prepared me for the kind of war fought with Smile's legal loopholes and property lines. By morning, I had a plan. First, I drove to the county recorder's office with a stack of documents, my deed plat maps, aerial photos, and my purchase agreement. I asked for any recent filings by the Pine Hollow HOA, especially anything related to boundary expansion or land use claims. The clerk, an older woman with reading glasses on a chain and a badge that read Marjorie Evans, gave me a raised eyebrow. "Another one, huh?" "Another what?" "Land dispute with Pine Hollow HOA," she said, opening a drawer. "You're the 4th one this quarter." That was telling and enraging. She printed out a series of filings. Most were HOA meeting minutes, proposed changes to community use agreements, and a curious document labeled Community Amenities Vision Plan. Buried in the appendix was a blurry sketch map showing the lake my lake colored blue, with dotted lines around it labeled Phase 2 Access Path Development. No legal force, Marjorie said, tapping it. Not recorded as a covenant. But they've been shopping this map around like it's gospel. They're using it to market lake access. "Yup," she said with a grimace. "Got 2 complaints about that already. Technically not illegal, but it's shaky as hell. Shaky's good. I can work with shaky." She smiled. I filed a formal notice of private ownership and restricted access with the recorder's office that day. It wasn't a lawsuit, but it was a public declaration attached to my parcel, stating the property was private and not governed by the HOA or any communal rights. Any future buyers who did their homework would see it in plain print. Next, I called a friend, an old Army buddy named Reggie Thompson, who'd gone into real estate law after serving. He owed me a favor, and this was the kind of thing he relished. "You're telling me they're trying to sell the illusion of access to your lake?" he asked, halfway through my story. "That's borderline fraud. They're saying the lake is community accessible. Is it no?" It's entirely within my deeded boundaries. Reggie paused. Okay. Start collecting evidence, screenshots, flyers. Record any meetings you go to. If they say on record that the lake is shared, they're walking into liability. The next week, I became a different man. Gone was the quiet retiree trimming hedges and mending fences. In his place stood someone sharper, more watchful. I started attending every HOA meeting. I sat in the back arms, folded, taking notes. They didn't like that, especially Karen. At the third meeting I attended, she stood up and announced a new agenda item clarifying lake access rights for all residents. The room shifted. Curious eyes turned toward me. Karen launched into a slideshow literally with a projector and bullet points. She showed the same blurry map. She cited historic use of the lake by the community despite having no photos or records to back it up. She used phrases like spirit of neighborhood and collective enjoyment. I raised my hand. She ignored me. I stood up. Point of order, I said. I'd like to respond. This is a board presentation, she said tight-lipped. Comments can be submitted after the session. I have documents showing that this lake has never been under HOA jurisdiction. I've filed a public notice of private ownership. If anyone steps foot on it without permission, they are trespassing. That stirred the crowd. Karen forced a smile. Let's keep this civil. Let's keep it legal, I replied. That night, I posted a sign at the lake's edge that read, Private Lake. All trespassers will be photographed, identified, and reported underneath. I installed 2 motion-triggered trail cameras, military grade, tucked beneath brush. They were silent, invisible, effective. Within 3 days, they caught 4 families walking onto my dock. Some had fishing poles. One had a paddleboard. All had been told by the HOA that the lake was open. I compiled a folder dated stamped and annotated. Reggie's voice played in my mind like a metronome. Evidence, evidence, evidence. Then came the kicker. Late one afternoon, I saw Karen herself standing at the shoreline with a man in a blazer and khakis. He had a clipboard and was pointing toward different parts of the lake. I stayed in the shadows, watching from the tree line. They walked around the water's edge, taking photos. She handed him something, a brochure. He nodded. They left. That night, I found it. An online listing just posted waterfront investment opportunity, limited lake access lots in Pine Hollow, Phase 2. There were mock-ups, illustrations, even a line in the description that read, residents enjoy exclusive access to lakefront trails and dock. I clicked the contact number. It rang once. Karen Delaney, she answered. You're selling something that doesn't belong to you. There was a pause. I'm marketing future access, she said. It's called vision. It's called misrepresentation. She laughed low and sharp. You really think one man is going to stop this? Yes, I said. Because this one man owns the land, and now I've got the entire internet watching. I hung up. That night, I launched a blog, My Lake, Not Yours, One Man's Fight Against HOA Greed. I uploaded the documents, the photos, the video clips. I posted weekly updates sharing my journey. By the end of the first month, it had over 10,000 views. Then a reporter from the local station called. The news van pulled into my gravel driveway just as the sun broke the horizon, painting the lake in shades of copper and pink. I stood at the end of the dock, arms crossed, watching the ripples lap gently against the shore the way they always did, when the morning wind came down from the pines. This wasn't the peace I had imagined when I moved here. But something about that morning, the distant hum of tires, the way the cameraman stepped carefully on the frost-hardened ground, told me that the story was about to turn. The reporter, Elise Thomas, greeted me with an eager handshake and a notepad already full of questions. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. So you're saying the HOA is falsely advertising lake access that legally belongs to you? Not just advertising it, I replied. They're selling the idea of it. Karen Delaney, the president, has hosted walkthroughs on my land without permission. And you have proof of that? I nodded. Trail cameras, deed lines, drone footage, even a listing that links to her official contact email. Her eyebrows lifted. Let's talk by the water, I offered. That's where it all starts. We walked to the dock where I showed her the exact boundary line that my surveyor had marked with discrete steel pins buried along the shoreline. I explained how the lake sat entirely within my parcel, confirmed by county records, and had never been listed as communal or recreational space in any public filing. What about the HOA's claim that the lake was historically accessible? Elise asked, tilting her mic toward me. That's their spin. Before I bought the land, it was unoccupied for 5 years. Some folks got used to sneaking in, but that doesn't make it theirs. The interview aired 2 days later. The headline was Blunt Veteran Battles HOA. Over private lake they tried to sell. Within hours, my inbox exploded. Supportive emails from neighbors, veterans, retired judges, even a few local officials who'd been burned by HOA politics themselves. But what mattered most was the call I received that evening. Mr. Whitman, this is Deputy Michael Sloan from the County Zoning Board. I sat up straight. Yes, sir. We've been reviewing a complaint filed regarding misrepresentation of public access and illegal signage posted by the Pine Hollow HOA. We'd like to schedule a field review of your property. I couldn't help smiling. You're welcome anytime. They came with clipboards, measuring tools, and a county drone. It felt like vindication wearing a reflective vest. After 2 hours of careful inspection, they confirmed what I already knew: the HOA had no claim to my lake. What I didn't expect was what came next. A few nights later, I was on my porch reading an old Raymond Chandler novel when headlights cut across my yard. A truck I didn't recognize pulled to a slow stop just before the tree line. 2 men stepped out, middle-aged, collared shirts, HOA name tags clipped to their chests. I remained seated. One of them, a taller man with salt and pepper hair, called out, "Mr. Whitman, evening," I said, not rising. "We're from the HOA advisory board," he said, like that meant anything. "We'd like to come to an understanding." I thought Karen was handling all the misunderstandings. I said evenly. "She's escalated things beyond what we're comfortable with," he said. "Some of the homeowners are getting concerned. We didn't authorize that lake listing. Didn't stop her from putting your names on the brochure." That made him flinch. He stepped closer cautiously, as if I might lunge at him. "Look, we just want this to go away. Quietly. No lawsuits. No press. You've already had both." He looked past me at the lake. "You've got something beautiful here." "I know," I said. "That's why I won't let anyone steal it." They left. No threats, just silence. But in their silence was something more powerful than a demand. It was a crack in their armor. 2 days later, I received a cease and desist letter from Karen. She accused me of defamation, obstruction of community planning, and intent to disrupt economic development. It was written on HOA letterhead, signed by her personally, and contained phrases like irreparable harm to the neighborhood brand. I handed the letter to Reggie, who laughed so hard he dropped his drink. "She's reaching," he said. "This isn't a cease and desist. This is a tantrum in Times New Roman." He drafted a response 4 pages dense with legal precedent and backed by declarations from 2 former county planners who'd already reached out in support. We attached every piece of evidence, including the footage of Karen walking with a real estate agent across my land, and sent it via certified mail. 3 days later, Karen filed an official complaint to the HOA board, claiming I was harassing her and creating division in the neighborhood. She didn't know I'd already spoken to half the board privately. She didn't know that 3 of them had offered to testify, that she never brought the lake access proposal to a proper vote. She didn't know that the county had officially suspended the HOA's pending request for land use expansion, citing potential misrepresentation of public amenities. She didn't know any of that. So she did the only thing a desperate person in a position of crumbling authority can do. She retaliated. That weekend, I woke up to the sound of chainsaws. Not on my land, but close, too close. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my phone, and jogged toward the tree line. There, right on the narrow strip between my lake and the HOA subdivision, stood 3 men in safety vests cutting down saplings and clearing brush. I approached, filming. "Who hired you?" They paused. "Pine Hollow, HOA 1 said we're clearing the public path. This is private property," I said. "That path Isn't legal. They hesitated. Talk to Karen. She signed the permit. I didn't need to talk to Karen. I needed to call the sheriff. And I did. Within an hour, a deputy stood beside me as I replayed the footage. He took notes, radioed dispatch, and wrote a formal trespassing report. The workers left. So did the chainsaws. But I stayed staring at the half-cleared path at the exposed roots and trampled ferns, and I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about a lake anymore. It was about being bullied, gaslit, undermined by people who thought they could bend reality through paperwork and intimidation. I turned back toward my cabin, heart steady, and whispered under my breath, "No more." The ground where they'd cut still looked raw days later, mud-torn open roots exposed like nerves under skin. I stood there every morning with my coffee in hand, watching dew settle on the disturbed earth, a scar now marring what had once been natural and undisturbed. I'd thought filing complaints, providing evidence, and putting up signs would be enough. But I had underestimated just how far someone like Karen Delaney was willing to go when power started slipping from her grip. She hadn't just tried to redefine my property lines. Now she was trying to physically carve a path through them. That week, I met with Reggie in town. We sat at a cafe across from the courthouse folders spread across our table like battle plans. He looked more like a professor than a lawyer, thick glasses, wool vest, always scribbling on yellow legal pads. "I think it's time," he said, tapping one of the maps I brought. "We file for easement termination and a quiet title action. Nail it all down legally and publicly. No more ambiguity." I nodded. "What about damages?" Reggie grinned. "Now you're thinking like a man who's been lied to one too many times." We drafted 2 actions, a quiet title lawsuit to formally and permanently establish my sole legal claim over the lake and all surrounding access points, eliminating any future HOA argument of implied easement. A petition to terminate unauthorized easements, targeting the strip where Karen had ordered her workers to cut through the trees. That little illegal pathway, it was now Exhibit A. By the time we filed both with the county clerk, I had also compiled a package to send to the state's Department of Consumer Protection. Why? Because the HOA's fake promises of lake access had been used in sales materials. That meant real estate fraud. I printed copies of Karen's listing, screenshotted her emails, sent in video clips from the families that had trespassed and later apologized when they realized they'd been duped. One couple even gave me a written statement that they bought their home because the HOA guaranteed exclusive lake privileges. That word, again exclusive. The illusion of luxury backed by lies. Karen had created a fantasy world and sold it like it was fact. But fantasies collapse when faced with truth, and the truth was starting to catch up. A week after filing, I received a formal notice that the county court had accepted my quiet title case. They even fast-tracked it, citing potential public confusion and financial harm due to disputed real estate marketing. Reggie called me the same afternoon. "You'll want to sit down for this," he said. "What now?" "She's countersuing. On what grounds?" "She claims the lake is part of a communal drainage basin under the Regional Water Management Plan. She's citing a water ordinance from 1986 that doesn't even mention Pine Hollow." I laughed. "Is she serious?" "She's reaching so far, she's going to dislocate her entire legal strategy," Reggie replied. But I didn't underestimate her anymore, because Karen wasn't working alone. The next day, a notice from the HOA arrived, taped to my mailbox, bold red letters at the top. Violation notice, unauthorized fencing and signage. They were fining me for putting up fences on my own property. According to the letter, I owed $500 in non-compliance dues for obstruction of proposed community access paths. The language was laughably circular. They were trying to penalize me for blocking a path that was never legal to begin with. But there was a deeper tactic at play: financial harassment. If they couldn't win in court, they'd try to bury me in threats and fees, death by paperwork. They'd picked the wrong man. I scanned the letter, wrote "Return to sender non-HOA member" across it in permanent marker, and mailed it back. I also filed a report with the Postmaster General for misuse of mail to attempt collection of unauthorized debt. Reggie filed a request for injunctive relief. If granted, the HOA would be legally barred from issuing further fines or entering my property until the court resolved our case. And then I took it one step further. I filed a formal petition to inspect HOA financial records, which under state law I was entitled to as a resident affected by their decisions. My goal wasn't to find anything in particular, but sometimes when you lift a rock, you find more than ants. And oh, did we. 3 days later, Reggie called again. There's a payment record dated 4 months ago. Karen authorized 4,700 to a landscaping company for lake perimeter beautification. Lake perimeter, I asked. Yours. She spent HOA funds on my property. Yep, and here's the kicker. That same company is the one that sent the workers who started cutting your trees. Now we had her on 2 counts, unauthorized land use and misappropriation of HOA funds, possibly fraud. I filed a criminal complaint with the county sheriff, and this time they responded swiftly. Detective James Holt came to my cabin the next morning. He wore jeans boots and a badge clipped to his belt. No pretense, no suit. He listened to everything. Took photos, logged GPS coordinates of the cut brush, collected copies of HOA budgets Reggie had pulled. He even took my trail cam footage. Don't worry, he said, as he zipped his folder shut. This isn't going to end the way they think it is. Karen must have felt it too, because 2 days later a real estate sign popped up in front of her house. For sale by owner. I stared at it for a long time. She hadn't won. She was bailing. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Because that lot she owned, the one right beside mine, the one she always used as her back entrance to the lake, it was about to go on the market, and I had cash ready. The for sale sign didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was a signal flare, a white flag dressed as a real estate listing. Karen Delaney wasn't leaving out of convenience or retirement plans. She was cornered, outmaneuvered, and for the first time in her life, powerless. I didn't smile when I saw it. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt focused. Her lot 27, sat directly between the main HOA subdivision and the narrow forest path she had tried to carve along my lake. Without it, there was no route, no point of access, no leverage. She'd spent months trying to bully, lie, and finesse her way into control. But in the end, she did the one thing I never expected. She opened the door. I called Reggie that same afternoon. She's listing lot 27. He paused on the other end of the line. That's the choke point. I know. I want it. Reggie whistled low. You got the cash ready. I've got more than enough. Ever since I sold a family property years ago back east, I'd kept the money in a quiet investment account, untouched, growing slowly, meant for some hypothetical future. Maybe a second cabin. Maybe a travel fund I'd never use. But now, it had a purpose, a keystone role. Let me reach out to the listing agent, Reggie said. We'll make this clean. No drama, just business. I agreed, but part of me knew there's no such thing as just business in a neighborhood ruled by politics and pride. We made the first offer within 24 hours of the sign, going up full asking price cash. No contingencies. The agent, a neutral party, unfamiliar with the long war behind the trees, was delighted. You must really love that lake, she joked over the phone. You have no idea. I expected Karen to stall, to protest, to reject out of spite, but within 48 hours, she accepted. Reggie and I double-checked everything. The title was clean. There were no liens, no surprise covenants buried in fine print. In fact, her ownership was so straightforward, it almost felt suspicious until we realized why. She's running, Reggie said. Once that fraud investigation opened up, she knew it was only a matter of time before someone pressed charges. He was right. By selling the lot, she was liquidating and disappearing. She would leave behind the mess she made, let the HOA collapse into infighting, and vanish with whatever dignity she had left. Fine by me, because now I owned lot 27, and that changed everything. The day we closed, I walked the narrow strip of pine woods between my cabin and the newly acquired lot. It was a forgotten space, no paths, no lighting, just overgrown brush and oak leaves carpeting the ground. But I saw it clearly. I saw a gate. I saw a fence that stretched across the entire edge of the lake-facing side, cutting off the fantasy of access once and for all. I called a contractor. Gave him simple specs, steel-reinforced posts, 12-foot sections, privacy boards, motion-triggered lights, and a security gate with digital keypads. He raised an eyebrow. That's a fortress. It's a line in the sand. He started that week. The construction took 3 days. On the morning of the 4th, I stood at the entrance of the new gate and installed one final sign, private property. No HOA access, trespassers will be prosecuted. It was bold, clean, and legal. It was also very, very visible from the edge of the HOA walking trail. The HOA board panicked. Karen was already gone, moved out under the cover of night, according to one neighbor. A moving truck, 2 SUVs, and the silence of someone who'd lost more than a home. No goodbye, no explanation. Just an empty house and a shuttered window. But her mess remained. I received an email from the interim HOA president, a man named Douglas McRae, who introduced himself as a peacemaker. He wanted to meet. I agreed. He came to my porch the next afternoon, no clipboard, no lawyer, no pretense. Just a man who looked tired, exhausted even. I poured him coffee. "You really bought her lot?" he said, scanning the trees. "Yes." "And you built a wall?" "No." "I built a boundary. There's a difference." He nodded. "She fooled a lot of people," he admitted. "I should have spoken up earlier. But she ran everything so tightly. People were afraid of being fined, ostracized. You know how that goes." "I do." "We'd like to make amends," he said. "The board is voting to revise the bylaws. We're removing any reference to lake access, officially, permanently. That's a good start." He reached into his folder and handed me a draft letter apology clarification and a formal public notice to be mailed to every homeowner. The lake is private property. No current or future HOA member shall represent otherwise. I read it carefully. Every word, every comma. Then I nodded. "You do this and I'll consider the matter closed." He exhaled deeply, like he'd been holding his breath since the day Karen first drew her imaginary map around my lake. As he left, he turned and said, "Some of us were wrong. We let her shape the story. Thank you for reminding us that facts still matter." After he left, I walked to the gate. I stood there in the fading light, the lake behind me, calm and quiet once more. And I realized something I hadn't dared to believe for a long time. I had won. Not just legally, not just financially, but morally. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't threatened, I hadn't bullied or schemed. I'd stood my ground, I'd done what I had to do. And now, for the first time since moving to Pine Hollow, the water reflected peace. Peace, it turns out, is not silence. It's not the absence of conflict or the illusion that everything's fine while someone else controls your fate behind closed doors. Real peace, the kind you can sit with at sunrise with a cup of coffee in your hand, and your name still sharp on the land beneath your feet, is built. And I had built mine. But peace also draws attention. Word spread quickly once the new HOA letter was delivered to residents. Some neighbors were relieved, others not so much. The ones who'd banked on that fake lake access as a selling point for their homes now felt cheated, though not by me, by Karen. And in their quiet frustration, they came knocking. One by one over the next few weeks, I had visitors. Retirees in golf polos, young families pushing strollers, real estate agents who used to wink and nod when talking about community amenities. They stood by my gate, peered through the privacy fence, and tried to negotiate. "Would you consider a small dock for community events?" "No. What if we offered to split maintenance costs?" My clients would love to offer above market value for just a sliver of shoreline. No. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't hostile. But I had learned with painful clarity that once you give a single inch, someone like Karen or her next incarnation will take the whole mile. The only people I allowed through that gate were the ones I trusted. Which is why one evening, as the leaves began to turn and autumn slipped across the water like a whisper, I was surprised to hear a knock at the porch. It was a boy. Maybe 16, maybe 17. Skinny shoulders hunched like he didn't belong anywhere yet. "Sir," he asked, hesitant, "are you the guy who owns the lake?" "I am." "My grandfather said to give you this." He held out an envelope, handwritten, creased. I took it, opened it, and read the first line. "Mr. Whitman, I owe you both an apology and a thank you. It was signed by Harold Atwood, one of the longest-standing HOA members, and I had recently learned one of the original founders of Pine Hollow before the subdivision boom. He went on to explain that the lake had never been intended for public use. In fact, when the land was parceled out decades ago, the original developers left that section private by design, an ecological buffer zone untouched and unsold for years. Karen apparently had misrepresented this fact not only to residents, but to the entire HOA board, going so far as to fabricate meeting notes and map overlays. Harold had found the original surveys in his attic rolled up in tubes stained with age. He was appalled and ashamed. At the end of the letter, he wrote, "You fought for what's right when we should have. Please forgive our silence." I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the mantel. The boy, Jake Atwood, stood there shifting on his feet. "You want some lemonade?" I asked. He blinked. "Sure." We sat on the porch. I poured him a glass. He stared out at the water. "My grandpa said he used to fish here when he was a kid, back when the lake was still part of the wild," I said. He nodded. "I didn't mean to be disrespectful," he added. I never saw someone stand up like that before. Someone has to." He looked down at his shoes, then asked, "How do you know when it's worth fighting?" I thought about that. "It's worth fighting when someone takes what's not theirs," I said. "When they cross a line you didn't draw to start a war, but one you have to defend just the same." He nodded again, slower this time. Before he left, I gave him a tour of the path I'd carved on my side, just a narrow, shaded trail through the trees. I told him what every plant was, showed him how to spot deer tracks in soft dirt. Let him skim a flat stone across the water. "Not everything needs to be bought," I told him. "Some things are meant to be protected." He smiled and left. Later that week, the court ruled in my favor. The judge's statement was clear, concise, and final. "This court finds that Mr. Jack Whitman is the sole and rightful owner of the land, encompassing Lake Jasper, including all access points, shorelines, and structures. The HOA shall cease all references to the lake in marketing or community documentation, and shall pay all court costs." It was done. But the story didn't end with a verdict. Something unexpected happened next. A local journalist, different from the TV reporter, reached out to do a feature. Not about the legal battle, not about Karen, but about me. They titled the piece, "The Quiet Lake Keeper, a Veteran's Stand for Property and Principle." It ran in the Sunday paper, accompanied by photos of me standing at the dock, arms crossed the lake, calm behind me. They mentioned my military service, my reasons for retiring here, and the lessons I'd learned about community power and silence. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in. Some from neighbors, some from strangers. One was from a woman in Oregon fighting her own HOA over a community garden. Another from a man in Florida, whose dock was destroyed without notice by a board vote he didn't know had even happened. They called me brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt tired, but proud. And maybe that's what bravery really is, doing the hard thing when you'd rather sit still. I framed the article and hung it in my small workshop. Not because I needed to be reminded of the fight, but because I needed to remember the cost, the hours, the stress, the relentless crawl of bureaucracy, and how even in the face of all that, one person can still hold the line. That fall, as the leaves turned copper and gold and drifted slowly onto the surface of the lake, I finally exhaled. The water was mine. The land was mine. And so was the peace I had earned. Winter came early that year. Frost began lacing the tips of the dock by mid-November, and every morning I'd step outside with my coffee, the steam rising from the mug as mist drifted slowly off the lake like a veil. It was quiet again, not the tense silence of legal waiting or neighborhood whispers, but real quiet, earned quiet. That stillness let me feel the weight I'd been carrying. For months, I'd lived in a state of quiet resistance, always alert, always anticipating the next letter, the next notice, the next subtle escalation. And now, with the court ruling behind me, and the HOA's silence settling like snowfall, I had space to feel tired. But more than that, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, free. One morning, I walked the perimeter of both my properties, my original lot with the cabin and lake, and the newly acquired Lot 27, now fully integrated behind the privacy gate. I marked trees for trimming, removed a few downed limbs after a storm, and stopped every so often to listen to the stillness. There's a kind of healing that only comes from watching the place you fought for return to its natural rhythm. Birds returning to old nests, squirrels dashing across the fence beams. Even the way the wind cut through the pines differently now that the fake trail Karen's team had tried to carve had grown over. I began making small improvements, things I'd postponed while I was under siege. A new footbridge over the marshy patch near the north end. Repainting the boathouse door. Installing a weatherproof camera system not out of paranoia, but practicality. I wanted the land to stay secure, yes, but I also wanted peace of mind, to stop being something I had to guard every hour of the day. Around that time, I received a formal invitation to speak at the Pine Hollow Town Hall. It wasn't a trap or an ambush, it was an honest invitation. The board was restructuring and wanted to hear from me as part of a broader conversation about transparency ethics and boundaries in community governance. I almost declined, but something about the gesture mattered. I wasn't just fighting against something anymore, I was being asked to help shape what came next. So I went. I sat under fluorescent lights in a room of 30 or so homeowners, most of them familiar faces now. There were a few awkward glances, a few sheepish smiles. But there was no hostility. Douglas McRae, the interim president, introduced me without fanfare. I stood and told my story. Not the war stories, not the courtroom drama, just the truth of what it felt like to have your home, slowly, subtly, almost politely taken from you, not through brute force, but through insinuation, paperwork, and the smirk of someone who believed no one would push back. I told them I wasn't angry anymore, but I was vigilant, and I hoped they would be too. Afterward, people clapped, not out of celebration, but solidarity. A few asked questions. One woman, Lisa Bennett, a single mother new to the neighborhood, asked how she could ensure her voice mattered in board decisions. Be the first to read the minutes, I said, and the first to ask what's not in them. She smiled and wrote that down. I left the meeting feeling lighter. Something was shifting in Pine Hollow. Slowly, honestly. A few old board members resigned. New volunteers stepped in, people with nothing to prove, no legacy to defend. Just neighbors who wanted order without control. A few weeks later, I received a card in the mail. No return address, just my name. Inside was a single sentence written in cursive ink, "You held the line. Now others can step forward." There was no signature. But I recognized the handwriting. It was Karen's. I stared at the card for a long time. Then I burned it in the fireplace. Not out of spite, out of closure. Let her start over somewhere else. That chapter was finished. Spring came in quietly, like a reward for all that had passed. I planted new trees along the edge of the fence, native ones that would root deep and strong. I cleared brush, installed benches by the water, and reopened the old footpath I used to walk when I first moved in. And then I did something unexpected. I invited people in. Not everyone. Not the entire subdivision, but a few. Jake Atwood came by on weekends, helping me repaint the boathouse and learning to tie fishing knots. I taught him how to sand wood properly, how to read cloud patterns for weather changes, and how to sit still long enough to let the lake talk back. Lisa Bennett came by with her daughter, Emma Bennett. They brought lemonade and a pie. I showed them the wildflowers growing on the north slope and let Emma toss breadcrumbs to the ducks. It wasn't about opening the land again. It was about choosing who to share it with. That's the power Karen never understood. Ownership isn't about shutting others out. It's about having the right to decide when and if you open the gate. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a fortress builder. I felt like a steward, a guardian, someone who'd fought not just to win, but to preserve something real for himself and for whoever might come next and need the strength to say no more. The year passed quietly. Seasons moved across the lake like layers of paint, icy whites in winter, fresh greens in spring, the heavy golds of summer, and now again, the burnished red of fall. I had never marked time by nature before I moved here. In the Army, we marked it by deployments, rotations, losses, But here, time felt like something I lived with, not something I fought against. Lot 27. The land I reclaimed from Karen's ambition had become more than just a buffer. I turned it into a wild meadow, sowed native grasses, installed birdhouses, and let it breathe. I planted a single oak tree in the center, young, straight, steady, and every morning I checked on it like it was a sentinel standing guard. And in some ways it was. I still got letters. Not from the HOA, those stopped months ago, but from strangers. People who'd read the newspaper article or found the blog I'd left online. Some wanted advice. Others wanted to vent. A few just wanted to know they weren't crazy. That was the word that kept appearing in those messages. Crazy. Am I crazy? Or is my HOA allowed to tow my car without notice? Am I crazy, or can they fine me for having a wind chime? Am I crazy? Or did I just get told that painting my front door beige is a visual hazard? They weren't crazy, but they were trapped, just like I had been. So I started replying. Not long essays, not legal consultations. I'm not a lawyer. But I told them what I'd learned, document everything. Stay calm, never take them at their word. And most of all, read your deed, not their pamphlet. Eventually, I turned those replies into a small guide, the homeowner's quiet guide to fighting back. It was simple, plain-spoken, and downloadable for free. And it spread. The blog gained traction. People shared it in neighborhood forums, real estate groups, even legal Reddit threads. One weekend, I woke up to find that a well-known real estate YouTuber had mentioned it in a video. That post alone brought in 20,000 new visitors. I was stunned and oddly comforted because it meant I wasn't alone. It also meant I had a responsibility. I started recording short audio versions of my blog entries. Nothing fancy, just my voice, a simple mic, the sound of birds in the background. I called the series Notes from the Lake. Each entry was 5 to 10 minutes long. Lessons learned, small stories. Reminders of what to watch for in your HOA agreements. And people listened. They wrote back, asking for more. One woman in Arizona told me she played the episodes while pruning her cactus garden, imagining herself standing by a real lake one day. Another man in North Carolina said my voice reminded him of his grandfather, and that my words helped him stay grounded during a 3-year battle over backyard chickens. I never intended to become anything more than a retired man with a lake and a long memory. But somehow I had become something else, a witness. Not a preacher, not a hero, just a man who had been tested and chose to speak plainly when others stayed quiet. And maybe that was enough. One afternoon, I received a certified letter from the county. For a moment, my chest tightened, but when I opened it, I read something I never expected. Dear Mr. Whitman, based on your exemplary conduct in preserving local ecology and promoting community awareness regarding private property rights, we are pleased to inform you that your property has been nominated for the Pine Hollow Land Stewardship Recognition. It wasn't a trophy or a grant, just a letter, a thank you, a recognition. And it meant more to me than any medal I'd worn in uniform, because it came from the place I had chosen to defend, not with weapons, but with resolve. I pinned it on the inside of my workshop door where I could see it each time I reached for a tool. That evening, as I stood by the dock, the oak tree in the distance, now a foot taller than when I'd planted it, I realized something. This land no longer carried the tension of battle. It had become a place of restoration. And I somehow had become part of that restoration. Not just for the land, but for myself. Because I hadn't just won a lawsuit. I had reclaimed my time, my voice, my story. And in doing so, I had made space for others to reclaim theirs. The lake, as always, reflected only what was honest. And for the first time in a long time when I looked into it, I saw peace looking back. By the following spring, I began to realize that peace wasn't a destination, it was a routine. There were no more threats taped to my mailbox, no more uninvited guests wandering down to the dock. The HOA's presence had receded like a tide, leaving behind only the faint traces of what had once been a siege. And in its place, something else had grown quiet respect. One Saturday morning, I found a small brown envelope on my porch bench. Inside was a handwritten note from a teenage boy, Jake Atwood, the same one who had delivered Harold's apology last year. Mr. Whitman. It began. I was wondering if I could build my Eagle Scout project on the trail by the oak tree. It would be a small bench for people to sit and watch the lake. I'll do all the work myself. Just wanted to ask first. I smiled. The boy who once looked down at his shoes now wanted to build something here, to leave something behind. It was the best kind of sign, not of surrender or authority, but of trust. I wrote him back immediately, Jake, that would be an honor. Jack. He built the bench with quiet care. I watched from a distance, not hovering, just admiring the way he measured twice before each cut, the way he consulted diagrams like they were treasure maps. His friends helped nervous at first, but they warmed up quickly. When it was done, they invited me to the small ceremony. Nothing fancy, just a few families, some lemonade, and a hand-painted plaque that read, "For rest, reflection, and respect built with gratitude." They even asked me to say a few words. I kept it short. I once had to fight to protect this place, I said. Now I get to watch others build something better on it. That's the best ending I could have asked for. Afterward, Lisa Bennett came up to me. She looked like she'd been carrying a weight for a long time, and maybe for a moment had put it down. "Thank you," she said, "for not shutting everyone out." I thought about it, I admitted, but walls don't make peace. Boundaries do. She nodded, and I watched Emma chase butterflies by the waterline. I had kept the lake safe for her too, for a future I might never see. That spring brought more than wildflowers. It brought closure. The final piece came unexpectedly in the form of an email. Not from a neighbor. Not from the HOA. From a woman named Clara Mendez, a legal consultant working with a state initiative on HOA reform. She had read my blog, listened to the audio stories, and now she wanted to interview me. Not as a plaintiff, not as a victim, but as a case study in resistance done right. Her team was working on a toolkit for homeowners, especially older residents, who felt powerless against their HOA boards. She wanted to use my story to illustrate how to fight back ethically, legally, and strategically. "You didn't rage," she said during our Zoom call. "You documented. You organized. You persisted. That matters." It was strange being seen like that. Not as a grump with a fence, but as someone who'd built a blueprint others could follow. We talked for an hour. She asked good questions, hard ones. What was the worst moment, she asked. I thought about it. Standing at the edge of my own lake, I said, watching strangers walk across my dock like it already belonged to them. That moment, I felt invisible. And the best moment, I didn't have to think. Standing in the same spot months later, holding the court ruling in my hand, knowing I was no longer alone, that I had turned invisible into undeniable. She smiled. "That's going in the toolkit," I laughed. "At least spell my name right." When the toolkit launched months later, I received a bound copy in the mail. My story was in Chapter 3, under the heading, "The Lake, the Fence, and the Man Who Drew the Line." I didn't expect the pride that welled up reading that title, but it came slow, warm, and real. That summer, I reopened the path through the Lot 27. Not wide, not marked, just a gentle foot trail from the edge of the fence to the water's edge, winding past the oak and Jake's bench. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't advertise. But those who knew found their way. A widow from 3 houses down brought her sketchbook and sat quietly drawing the reflection of cattails in the water. 2 boys from the cul-de-sac asked if they could catch minnows. I gave them jars and told them to put the rocks back where they found them. And one morning I found a bouquet of wildflowers on the bench with a note that simply read, "Thank you for keeping the lake safe." I never found out who left it. But I didn't need to, because what mattered wasn't the victory anymore. It was what came after. The calm, the shared silence, the quiet resilience of a place, and a man no longer afraid of being erased. The lake outlasted the noise. That's what I think about most now, sitting on the dock in the late summer light, my feet bare, the air thick with the hum of cicadas, and the warm scent of pine resin. The fight was long, ugly at times, but it passed, and what remains is mine. Not just the property lines or court victories, not just the paperwork or the newly planted oak. What remains is dignity. The sense that I stood for something when it mattered most, and I didn't let anyone HOA or otherwise rewrite the truth of what I had built, what I had preserved. They tried, didn't they? Karen tried. The HOA tried. They dressed up their ambition in community slogans and legalese in red-lettered notices and neighborhood smiles. They assumed no one would push back, especially not an old man with a dock and a stack of deed papers. But they didn't see what I'd seen. Didn't know the battles I'd fought overseas in frozen zones and desert heat, where the enemy wasn't paperwork, but bullets, and where you learned that the only way to hold your ground was to claim it with your whole soul. They didn't know that land wasn't just acreage to me. It was memory, promise, peace. And in the end, their scheming collapsed under the weight of something far heavier than laws: truth. Truth and time. This place healed with time. So did I. I wake up now, not with tension in my shoulders, but with quiet purpose. The first thing I do is open the back screen door, let the wind move through the cabin, and listen to the morning. Some days I fish. Some days I sand down old cedar planks and fix the railing. Some days I just walk the path past Jake's bench and touch the bark of the young oak growing straighter every year, its roots deepening into the soil I fought to protect. I still keep the trail cameras up, though mostly out of habit. They capture wildlife, now foxes, deer, the occasional heron passing through. No intruders, no trespassers. Just the rhythm of a place returned to itself. The HOA has changed. Douglas stayed on as president, but the tone is different now, quieter, more human. They focus on sidewalks and seasonal planting, not surveillance. They publish their minutes openly. And they never speak of the lake. Not in meetings, not in emails, not in brochures. It's become almost sacred, that silence. The lake is still mine. But it's also a symbol now, not just to me. A few weeks ago, a young couple from the other end of the neighborhood stopped me while I was trimming hedges. "Are you Mr. Whitman?" the woman asked. "The one from the article, I suppose I am." She smiled. "We just moved in. We wanted to say thank you. We read everything before buying here. And because of you, we knew what to look for. We felt safe choosing this place. Safe." It hit me harder than I expected. That's what this whole journey had been about. Not vengeance, not punishment, safety. The right to feel safe in your home, safe from manipulation, safe from manufactured authority, safe from the idea that someone else can redefine the limits of your life without your say. The man beside her added, "If you ever host a community fire pit night, we'd love to bring marshmallows." I chuckled. No fire pits on the dock, but I'll keep it in mind. We talked a while longer, then parted ways. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I lit the lantern by the dock. Not the motion light, not the security flood, just the old oil lamp that hung from the post when I first moved in. It gave off a soft amber glow, flickering against the water as if the lake were remembering with me. I sat beside it and listened. To the frogs, the breeze, the distant clinking of wind chimes from another yard. And then, in the stillness, I spoke aloud, not to anyone, not for any reason, just because the moment deserved it. I'm home. Not a cabin, not a lot, not a victory in court. Home. Where the land remembers your footsteps. Where the trees grow straight because you let them. Where peace is not silence, but presence. And though I may grow old here, older than I already am, I know this. The lake will endure, and so will the story of the man who said no, and meant it.